Hi there, my name is Felix Kozok. I'm part of the WDC 2026 team. This is, of course, the team for World Design Capital Frankfurt Rhein-Main 2026 under the motto of Design for Democracy. And today I have two special guests with me and we want to talk about ethics in design. To my right, I have Anna Witcher, Professor of Design Policy from Cardiff. Welcome. And I have Philipp Cartier from Gestaltungszentrale Politik, so Design Center for Politics from Hamburg. And we're going to talk about ethics in design. We are just coming off of a workshop for design policy for Frankfurt Rhein-Main. So Anna, you can tell us probably a lot about how your work personally relates to the theme of design for democracy.
Absolutely. I'm really passionate about what design can bring to government, to businesses and to communities. And we've just come out of a workshop to co-design a design action plan or a design policy as part of the World Design Capital. And so it's really crucial that we practice what we preach and that we try to get as many stakeholders in as part of the process as possible. So from across the design ecosystem, and ideally maybe a series of stakeholders who perhaps wouldn't ordinarily relate to being part of the design ecosystem. So how can we truly collaboratively and creatively create this vision for design in Frankfurt Rhein-Main, and how can we take that forward collectively? And of course, ethics is a part of that, making sure that everybody feels they've had a voice in the process.
It's probably also the overlapping of ethics and democracy, or like where the two topics, the broad topics overlap, is like this idea of including multiple perspectives into the work, right? You definitely can also talk to that, Philipp, because your whole job with the Gestaltungszentrale, for one example, is bringing in different perspectives to a certain topic.
Yeah, at least that's what we try, and the whole goal is to kind of get a promise or get a prototype for the promise we make, because the promise design makes very often is to be very participatory, to be very open and experimental, but I feel like often good examples are missing. So we took on this challenge and try to bring some examples and learn from the practice, because there's a lot that you can think about and plan about, but the thing that design has in common in general, what I would say is it's very good in acting in the practice. So like getting in the situation, getting into the context, and then adapting your whole concept, your process, your design to the situation you're in now, because the situation always depends, or is always depending your the process and the design.
And at the Gestaltungszentrale, you advise politicians, if I remember correctly, on how to do their job, so to speak, with a different perspective, with the designer's perspective, right?
Yeah, we're trying not to tell them what to do better. We're trying to help them in the job they're already doing very good, I would say. But the idea is to give them a different perspective on how to design. Politics is very good in making decisions, and that's what they see as design, to make a decision, to get into negotiations and gather a common sense. But we as designers try to get them into a mood with more people, getting more people into the room, and getting people into the room that have that learned a different way of thinking, a more creative way of thinking, and trying to help them with that, because they are in problems as well. It's not like that everybody of them likes how it works. They see their kind of work in a problematic situation as well, and are very critical to themselves. And we trying to offer them something to get into workshops together, to get onto a wall and draw things, to get into a context and see with your own eyes what the context is about, to talk to the people that are in the context, and get this more close to the politicians who have the power to decide about what's going to happen.
It's kind of like an expanded way of thinking, like trying to put yourself in the position of someone else and try to think from their perspective is something that designers, I think, are very used to, which is also part of like ethical considerations. How do you see this with the design policy? You're always like the one who has to translate what comes out of the design community, out of the design sector, and then translate it into politics. Is this an easy job, or?
Absolutely not. And sometimes we actively avoid engaging at that political level because there are so many processes and legislation and things that have to be put in place. So actually, is a community-led design action plan more ethical, more equitable than a conventional regulation or government-led design action plan? So actually, do we need a grassroots level led design action plan, or do we need a government level design action plan? And both have their merits, but I think that they certainly involve different levels of equity, and I think that's certainly something to consider as part of a process of developing a design policy.
And in your work, have you ever encountered like ethical challenges, maybe in regards to inclusion or to power dynamics, something like that?
I mean, all the time. I think we can all recognize, what an idealized design process is in terms of getting those diverse voices involved, ensuring there's equity in the process. But actually translating that into practice, can be a challenge. We're all under pressure to produce results quickly. We want to engage, we want to get that design policy into place. And perhaps the organisation commissioning the design policy, they've got a certain timeline, and that doesn't necessarily always allow for that level of exploration, for that level of engagement, that perhaps we would see as ideal. So sometimes there can be trade-offs as part of that process, and that can bring you into conflict, with a collaborative design process.
And how is it for you, Philip? Have you ever encountered specific ethical challenges?
Totally. I mean, I just said we work with members of parliament. They are elected to have power. Nobody elected us. We have no mandate to do what we do. We just work with people who have the mandate and who are elected in a democratic way. So for us, it's very important to differentiate between like the explorative process and the design process, but also the decision making. We are not part of the decision making. We have no mandate, as I said, to do that. But still, I mean, it's like you can't separate it that much from each other. The ideas that are mentioned and made up in this room change because I am in the room or someone from our team is in the room. And if it would be someone else, it would be a different idea maybe, or different highlight in the whole thing. And that's very difficult. The important thing is, I think, to be clear in what you stand for. Like we wrote down our position, what we stand for, and everybody who works with us has to agree to this position and knows what we stand for. We can't, we shouldn't even think about having like a neutral position or anything. We have a position and we should make clear what this position is. And that's how we try to get to deal with this ethical challenge. And the second challenge, I would say, is if you want to participate people, there's always groups that can't be participated. I mean, the most obvious one would be like animals who are affected by anything as well. But there are also like special or there are groups that are marginalized, who are hard to participate, or who can't be participated in a way we do it right now. So it's always a challenge of you can't do enough of it. You can't ask enough people. You always have to ask more. But of course, at some point you have to end and come to a point. But that's a permanent stretch.
But does a position paper or a code of conduct help with that? Because I can imagine, of course, we're always trying to include as many people as we can and be as ethically responsible as we can. But I figure that having kind of a set of standards could help you to make these decisions quicker and be more effective in your work and still integrate these ethical considerations, right?
I wouldn't say it makes it easier, but it's definitely necessary to deal with it and to write it down. And you should always see it as just partially done. It should always be a working paper if you write something down like this. And it helps in communication, if we start with a client, it's clear what we stand for. And it's also clear, I mean, we work in the political sphere, it's also clear whom we're not going to work with. for example, parties that are working against democratic structures, which is one part of our position. But it's also necessary to implement this position into your work. You have to act what you're saying you're standing for. And that's the hardest point, I would say, to really live what you positioned yourself in.
But yeah, maybe like a follow-up question then also for you, Philip. I mean, you both are kind of like boundary figures, moving from one field, which is design, to another field, which is politics. Even you're not a designer, but you're coming from design, but moving into politics. I can imagine that's quite a challenge. And now thinking of like everyday designers, they are probably also good in having ethical considerations. As I mentioned, like having this expanded way of thinking and always thinking about what might be something the user actually needs or the human actually needs if we talk about human-centered design. But I'm wondering personally, how do we get ethics into design? Is there a specific formula for it, or should there be like an expert council on ethics for design? Or is it something designers come across naturally and build naturally?
I wouldn't say it's coming naturally, that's for sure, but I would say we should deal with this special interest like we do with every other. Like, I have no clue of constructing a building. I have no clue of programming an application, but I talk to people who do it and I work with them when I develop a product, when I develop a building or like a surrounding, anything. I talk to the people who are very good in this topic, who have the competencies, and as always, I should have some of these competencies as well. So I definitely think it should be part of education in design, to talk about what you do, to think about what you do, what's the impact of it, like who are you excluding, who are you including, and that's very important to make yourself aware of this. But also you should, in your work, keep talking to people who are more into these questions, who have developed more competences and more of an ongoing idea of how to deal with ethics. So we definitely have to talk to people who are more into it.
Yeah, I would build on that. I would say it absolutely has to be in education. There has to be a set of guidelines or standards that have to be kind of universally understood by, the design community. But also, as you say, they're ever evolving, because, designers are facing challenges now when they're working with policymakers. AI is a huge part of the policy development process now. And actually, how do we keep design as part of that policy process, which uses AI, to humanize the numbers, to validate what's coming out of the AI? Is the application of AI for policy ethical? And actually, how can we use design to potentially make that more ethical, more equitable? So, as you say, it's a very fast-paced moving area, but it absolutely has to be standardized, I would say.
Maybe it's also like a question of how to make sure to protect yourself as a designer, as a follow-up question, because you're dealing with people, with humans, with everyday needs and with data. And there should be some ethical guidelines regarding how you interact with them, how you proceed with your work, but also how to protect yourself as a person, because as a designer, we tend to be very much out there in the field.
Yeah, I think you're right, but also I wouldn't like to see it as a protective tool, because that feels, in the field of ethics, just too excluding and too separative. I would see it more as it's part of the reflection of what you do, and that helps, and it's important to do it because you have a power, and if you design, you always leave things out, and you have to be aware of what these things are. I mean, of course, it's kind of a protection, but I wouldn't see it as one. I would more likely see it as a necessary, helpful addition. No, not addition. No.
No, it shouldn't be an add-on. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I would see it slightly differently. Sometimes there are a number of designers who have neurodiversity, and there are also designers who are incredibly empathetic, who are real empaths. So, sometimes doing user research and you're getting involved in the field work and hearing all these user stories is actually, has an emotional toll for people. So how, we want to be really empathetic, we want to engage, but also, there is a lot of emotion that can be involved in doing some of these projects and doing user research. So, maybe it's about how you protect yourself emotionally, and how, you have an ability to be able to leave this at work and not carry some of this around with you. So I perhaps see it like that, and, how we can develop strategies for designers who have neurodiversity, for example, so they can, really cope with some of these mechanisms.
So it's more like a protection against yourself and your own biases and your emotions. Totally agree. Yeah.
I also it also came to mind, I would also not see it like as a shield, or like this would also be an add-on to have like a protective shield, but it's more, if you see it as grounding your work anyway, then it's also something that gives you room to make mistakes, I guess, because then if you ground your work in ethical considerations, of course, mistakes are part of that. And then you are aware of that there will be mistakes, nothing will be perfect. Building on that, on this question of making mistakes, how do you see the role of designers for future democracies? What should that be?
I think the nice competence that design has and that designers often share is to see a position differently, or to see a current state in a different way, and to visualize it, and to be able to talk about it, and to build a new vision. And that's something that's very important for democracies. Right now we see how much democracies relied too much on what they have been developed for and not evolving more. But they have to develop further. Democracies are a process and not a finished governmental structure that has been developed in one day and then can work on. It has to develop continuously, and it hasn't that much in the last decades, I would say. So it's a good idea, I think, to be creative, and that's what designers often are: being creative and seeing different options, making experiments, and
Yeah, and to build on that, I would say that design often adds the most value when it's at the intersection with another innovation discipline. So design and futures foresight, design and behavioural insights, design and systems thinking. And we need all of these innovation methods, for future democracy. As you say, we all know there's a crisis of confidence and legitimacy in governance. So how can we reimagine, the future of democracy? And I think design is one of a number of innovation tools in that toolbox.
Mm-hmm. I mean, funnily enough, we at WDC 2026 are actually exactly working on this topic. What can design bring to democracy, to strengthen democracy, to open up democracy, to experiment with democracy even? But let me ask you one final question. What do you personally hope will come out of this very special World Design Capital in relation to design, democracy, and maybe even ethics?
In the design scene, we have in design work in general, in the creative field, there's a culture of work, a culture of communicating with each other that I really enjoy and that I think has a very democratic base to it. So I would like to, and that's what we are working for as an initiative, to have this same culture, has a very democratic base, also in politics and civil servants discussions, because it has this opportunity to see things in a new way and to always be open to new experiments, and to have the competencies to talk to other people, because you're always working in context that affect other people. And that's like the base of politics, deciding what other contexts have to do. And it's also the same in design. You work for the other contexts. And that's why I think the culture is a very key, the working culture is a very key aspect that I could see very well in politics.
So to bring the connections, or to build the platforms where these cultures can also meet and exchange beyond the design ecosystem, so to speak.
I would like to see 1,000 designers working in the public sector as a result of the World Design Capital designation. I would like to see them at every level of governance, at within the city in Frankfurt, but also in Frankfurt Rhein-Main, and then in the Hessian region. And I want to see them at every level. So I want to see, a chief design officer, but I also want to see them at other levels, including on the front line in delivering public services. So I want to see user researchers, service designers, policy designers, graphic designers, interaction designers being part of the kind of framework of government.
Yeah, putting numbers on ethics, or like putting numbers on goals, is sometimes also something that can be very helpful. We just learned in the workshop as well. Thank you too so much for this conversation on design and ethics and democracy, of course. And yeah, hope you enjoy the rest of the day. I will definitely do that. Thinking of Industrial Design Day and ethics and design.
Thank you.